My name is Gary Cohen. I'm the Director of Healthcare Without Harm.
My name is Aquena Freechild. I'm the U.S. Strategy Coordinator for the International Campaign for Justice in Bhopal.
Could you contextualize the Bhopal Union Carbide disaster, which people may know occurred in December of 1984, but the background of the plant, what did it do, and the events leading up to December 1984?
Union Carbide built a pesticide factory in Bhopal, India, in the late 60s to expand into the Indian market for industrial-scale agriculture. Within a few years, the plant was not making very much money. The market for their products hadn't expanded. And so the company, which is a subsidiary of the U.S. company, Union Carbide, decided to cut back on a number of safety systems, training for personnel, and other kinds of safety features. Workers in the plant saw that this was happening and started to alert the local media that there was a real disaster waiting to happen. And the company also had done some kind of safety report to suggest that there might be problems, and the safety report identified more than 50 problems in the factory. None of these were acted on. And as a result of this lack of responsibility, on the night of December 2nd and 3rd, 1984, there was a massive explosion and gas leak out of the Union Carbide factory in Bhopal, spreading toxic chemicals across a city of 1 million people. And in one night, more than 8,000 people had died in the ensuing years from long health impacts related to their long-term exposure. More than 20,000 people have died. So Union Carbide really is the Hiroshima of the chemical industry.
I think that pretty much summarizes the background. I can talk a little bit about what happened that night. So imagine waking up around midnight with your eyes burning, not able to stop coughing, stumbling out of your bed, semi-blind, hearing people screaming and running in the streets, not sure what to do. Many people had their children with them and couldn't run. Others began to run when they heard that it wasn't just burning chilies or some other bizarre phenomenon, but actually a gas leak from this plant. And as they ran, they breathed in more and more of this toxic methyl isocyanate gas that Union Carbide had been storing at room temperature, highly reactive, for months, unrefrigerated. And as they breathed the gas in, they fell by the roadside and died. Many of them were suspended in animation and appeared to be dead. And there were many cases of people actually leaping off of funeral pyres because the cyanide that had gotten into their bloodstreams made them appear to be dead. As Gary described, the death toll was horrific the next day. The streets were littered with bodies, and the city was basically shut down and evacuated for several months after the disaster. But throughout this entire process, the police were not notified. There was no widespread alarm for the city when doctors desperately called the plant personnel asking what to do about these thousands of dying people that were pouring into the hospital. The experts, quote-unquote experts at Union Carbide, said there was no long-term effect and they should just wash their eyes with milk and water and eggs and they should be fine. And these are doctors who have dead people, dying people on their hands. So the company was completely unprepared and unaccountable. And in the days following the disaster, Warren Anderson, who was the CEO of Union Carbide at that time, decided to go to Bhopal and try to soothe the people of Bhopal. And he was immediately arrested upon arrival and charged with culpable homicide, among a number of other charges, along with Union Carbide as a company. And he posted a very small amount of bail, I believe it was $2,000, and has never returned. So those criminal charges have been outstanding since 1984. There's been no criminal justice whatsoever for the people of Bhopal.
Why was the plant placed near or among a fairly dense population?
Well, there was Bhopal is very centrally located in India. Has very strong rail lines that connect to both Bombay and Delhi and other parts around the country. So it was seen as a opportune place in which to site a pesticide factory. We find all over the world there are many very dangerous factories that have the same kind of potential of a disastrous accident located in cities all around the world. There's in the United States there's over 110 chemical facilities that are in areas where the population is 1 million or more people that could still cause a Bhopal-like disaster. And after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, there was very clear work by the U.S. government to cover up, not disclose to the public what those sites were. And so there's still, Bhopal is still very much a live issue in that there are tankers running through American cities full of chlorine gas. There are highly toxic chemicals being produced in U.S. factories that if they exploded or if they were the subject of a terrorist attack, we would see another Bhopal-like disaster in the United States.
And what is known about the population that was affected in terms of their class and religious background and the like?
Well, Union Carbide decided to build their factory near railroad facilities to be able to transport their products, and there were slums that rose up very quickly during the construction part of the project, and it was very close to the city, and those continued to grow during the construction to the point where there were significant impoverished areas around the factory before it opened and continued to grow after that. And so the people who were immediately affected and worst affected were those living right along the plant, right along the railroad lines, which are government owned, and so they're very inexpensive land for poor people to try to live on. And that's part of the reason why this issue has been so neglected by the Indian government, which till this date has not been very helpful in providing health care to the survivors, despite the fact that they have tens of thousands of very, very sick people on their hands that have, until this year, not provided adequate clean water to the citizens of Bhopal who are drinking Dow Carbide's chemicals every day. And they're finally starting to do that. But the general mentality of the Indian government, and I believe also Union Carbide and now its current owner, Dow Chemical, is that these people are poor, they're Indian, and their lives are just not worth the same as somebody else. And that's the way that this whole situation has been treated till this day in Madhya Pradesh state, where Bhopal is located, and in India and in the U.S.
Another factor is that the population that is surrounding the factory and also which is still faced with the contamination of leaking toxics in the groundwater is mostly a poor Muslim population. And the government of Madhya Pradesh is a conservative Hindu government. And so they haven't had much of an appetite to protect their Muslim citizens.
That would be the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party.
Right. There's a Hindu nationalist party that runs the Madhya Pradesh government, and they have traditionally treated Muslims as second-class citizens.
So Muslims constituted the majority of those affected and are still being affected?
Well, there were more than 500,000 people that were affected by this disaster. When there was some small settlement on Union Carbide, over 500,000 people got the equivalent of about $1,000 each for 25 years of suffering, $1,000 each. And that's quite broadly distributed between Muslims and Hindus. The people that are still close around the factory, where there is extensive groundwater contamination, those are mostly Muslims.
Now, explain about the water issue and what its impact is today. I mean, are you saying that Union Carbide and subsequently Dow never cleaned up the chemicals on the site and that they are now leaching in the aquifer?
Right. There's actually two disasters in Bhopal. There's the gas disaster that's very well known, relatively speaking. And then there's this water contamination issue, which has been present since before the disaster, since 1982. Union Carbide knew that there was liquid toxic waste getting into the water table, poisoning animals. They actually compensated some people for being poisoned. And they did their own tests after the disaster in 1987 that showed that some of the water and soil in the area mixed with water had a 100% mortality rate for fish in the water. So if you can imagine people actually drinking this water day in and day out, and it's spreading in the groundwater for the last 25 years. It's about 25,000 people drinking toxic water from this huge area outside of the factory as well as within the factory that's just a dead wasteland of buried toxic waste and liquid toxic waste that was pumped into these enormous solar evaporation ponds for years. And Dow Chemical, which is the current owner of Union Carbide, they bought Union Carbide in 2001, would like this entire story to be buried, and they don't want to acknowledge that Bhopal is an ongoing poisoning incident for which that they are completely liable because they are full owners of Union Carbide. They'd like us to think that this is just a date in history and that the suffering has ended, when in fact a whole second generation has been affected both by gas-affected parents and poisoned water.
When you walk around the factory site in Bhopal today, you still see the abandoned factory there, and you still see the lab still there, and you see all the rotting carcass of this pesticide factory. And all these plants have overgrown it, and it's become a bit of a industrial jungle. But you have this feeling of some vast tragedy having happened here. It has the feeling of when you walk around the concentration camps in Poland, you know that something really terrible has happened in this place. And the tragedy in Bhopal is that the company has never really cleaned up the mess. It's still there. They've never faced criminal trial, even though there's an outstanding warrant for the CEO of Union Carbide. There's even been a request to extradite him from the Indian government. And so they've never faced justice. They've never accepted full responsibility. And the people in Bhopal who have continued to fight for their right to be toxic-free, for their right to health care, for their right to justice, they have shown a fierceness that is very powerful and very commendable, and are standing up, not just for themselves, but for everybody around the world that is facing other kinds of corporate injustice.
I had the opportunity to meet Rashida B. and Champa Devi at their Chingara. Explain what that is and what they're doing there.
These two leaders of the Bhopal struggle, Rashida B. and Champa Devi, were recipients of the Goldman Foundation Prize, which awarded them $125,000. And rather than taking the money for themselves, they set up a trust called the Chingari Trust. And the trust is engaged in a couple of different projects. One is providing an award each year to a woman who is involved in an important struggle in the country around corporate crime. The second big area is that they set up a school for children with severe birth defects, and they're providing the funds for those kids to get physical therapy and to get some kind of education and some kind of support for them and their families. So it's quite commendable.
When I was at Chingari, they showed me some slides of the various children that have been affected with terrible, many of them cleft palate problems. And after a while, I couldn't watch it. It was just so painful. It was so unbearable.
Yeah, the second generation is an incredibly powerful symbol of what Bhopal is today. You have these very visible birth defects where children's fingers are fused together. You have cleft palate. You also have a huge number of children who were born immediately after the disaster, especially boys, stunted growth, mental retardation. Some children compulsively eat dirt, which is, of course, contaminated in this area. And these children are within a setting of socioeconomic difficulty as it is. Their families hide them away and sometimes won't bring them for treatment at all, because if somebody knows there's a disabled or poisoned child in your family, you can't marry any of your children off, which means economic burden for the rest of your life in a very poor family. Also, the contaminated water issue. You have women and girls waiting in line for what little clean water they could get for the last 10 plus years, fighting over poison water sometimes, spending hours in line trying to get this clean water, not going to school, not having time to take care of basic family needs. So Dow's legacy in Bhopal with these children carrying the poisons of this entire generation on their faces, unable to remove it, is really Bhopal today, and it's not something that we're going to let Dow Chemical forget about until they clean up in Bhopal.
I walked in the area between Sabhavana Bhavan and the plant, and there's a stream. I don't even know if you could call it a stream right behind. It's not flowing. It's not streaming. It's completely clogged up with waste and plastic bags. And then, curiously, you see new constructions next to wretched what are called jugis in India. These like cardboard huts. Why are people building there?
Well, Bhopal is an expanding city, and so people continue to build and to fill in areas that were garbage dumps and industrial wastelands. The contrast between the Sambhavana clinic and the factory, which is a mere quarter-mile away, is a really powerful counterpoint, because you have the factory with it really represents, it's a death factory. It represents the worst abuses of the chemical industry in the 20th century. And then you have this flourishing, beautiful clinic that represents the best of green building design, and there's a Ayurvedic clinic growing the herbs that are treating the patients there. And so you have this very powerful counterpoint between hope and life and death.
Has the UN taken up this issue at all?
There has been a visit by a UN rapporteur on food and water to Bhopal, but I'm not sure what the outcome has been of that. We'll certainly be reaching out to them in this 25th anniversary year since the disaster to see what else can be done. But the Indian government is currently slowly, we hope, moving towards a commission that will actually involve the survivors on the federal level in solving these problems. I think that the Bhopal movement is really exemplary in involving the survivors, the people most affected by the problem we're addressing, at the heart and the core of what we're doing. And it's shown that the Indian government, while it's not been able to serve its own people, if you can involve the people who are most affected, things will get corrected. And we've had a recent victory in Bhopal in that 12,000 people do have clean water now in these water-affected areas, and we're stopping the cycle of poisoning. And that's a direct result of a long series of protests and sit-ins in New Delhi, 500-mile marches by survivors advocating for their basic right to not be poisoned every day in the water they drink. So we have a really vital movement coming up here. And I just want to mention that 2 of the second-generation survivors who are not visibly affected in terms of birth defects but are incredibly powerful advocates for their rights will be coming to the U.S. In April and May of this year, 2009, and you can look on bhopal.net, BHOPAL.net, or studentsforbhopal.org, and check out when they might be coming to your town.
There is a UN-sponsored meeting in May called the International Conference for Chemical Management that is talking among 180 countries about the future of chemicals management on the planet. And certainly the Bhopal story will be one of the poster child stories at that event because it highlights a number of very important things that we've learned in the last 25 years about toxic chemicals. which is that it's not just the impact on the people who are initially exposed to toxic chemicals, but it's the hand-me-down poisons. It's the ones that impact the next generation. And if we've learned anything in the last 25 years, it's that toxic chemicals at very, very small doses can impact the developing fetus and the young child and lead to long-term health impacts for the next generation.
Dow itself has a dubious record, as it was the producer of Agent Orange, which was spread in great quantities over the Vietnamese countryside. And so now, 40 years after that American war in Vietnam, there are still Vietnamese children being born with defects and all kinds of health problems.
Dow has grown up with many different disasters in their closet. Agent Orange was one of them, but so was napalm. And so was another chemical pesticide called DBCP, which was found to make workers sterile. And so in Latin America, there's reports of over 15,000 banana workers who've been made sterile by this chemical. They've also a producer of another chemical that's been notorious in this country called bisphenol A, which has been found in baby bottles and other products. And so there's actually a very powerful kind of solidarity that people around the world who are organizing around toxic chemicals feel with people in Bhopal, because the same chemicals that are in the bodies of people in Bhopal are also in our bodies and our children's bodies. And so in an unwitting way, Dow has created a network of people united by their own poisons. And we see ourselves as linked to fighting for a toxic-free future so that children all over the world can be born without toxic chemicals in their bodies, and that mothers all over the world can breastfeed their infants without passing on their lifelong supply of chemical poisons onto them.
And tell me about Environmental Health Fund. What is it?
Environmental Health Fund is an organization that specializes in building networks and coalitions to support transformational change around chemicals and health. And we facilitate international campaigns and national campaigns and other efforts to build citizen power, to change the rules of the game around how people are being protected from toxic chemicals.
And how can people affect the Bhopal issue specifically and in general get involved on changing the rules of the game, as you say?
Sure. We have chapters of the Bhopal campaign, about 15 cities in the United States. We have chapters in Toronto and London. There are about 10,000 people who support the Bhopal cause in the UK alone. So pretty much anywhere you are, if you want to go to bhopal.net or studentsforbhopal.org and let us know that you're interested in the Bhopal issue, we can connect you with people who are already working on the issue. There's certainly a lot of activity and help that's needed here in the United States to make sure that our largest chemical company, Dow Chemical, is held to account for the 23,000 deaths in Bhopal, which thus far no one has been held legally liable for all those deaths. And I think it's important for all of our health and safety that that legacy is changed. So come help.
And funding for the Environmental Health Fund, how could people contribute to that?
We will have a website up, environmentalhealthfund.org, within about a month. We don't have one right now. But you can call us at 617-524-6018 if you'd like to get in touch.
One more time, that phone number.
617-524-6018.
Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, David.